Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so sorry for the delay. I was having a bit of trouble um with the connection, but thankfully I was able to resolve it. So happy Martin Luther King Day. I hope you are, I guess it's a public holiday. So I hope you've had a good time just staying with family and friends and thinking about the great work that Dr. King has done. And I think it's not just in the US, really in the history of the world, to have such a person take a stand and all of that. And of course, with me today is Miss Judy. Say hello, Miss Judy.
Hello.
So, um, for those of us who haven't met with you, tell us a little bit about yourself and why Dr. King's Day means something to you.
Okay, well, I am Judy Pokaka'a, and I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've been here for about 3 years now. I have two kids and just got my first grandbaby December 26th. His name is Dawson, and I'm so happy. I have been quilting for about 5 years. However, I used to tie my grandma's quilt when I was a little girl. So I've been around quilting all my life. And when it comes to Dr. Martin Luther King, he was a favorite of my dad's. And as a kid, um, we had a record player, and my dad had his speeches on records. And we would listen probably once a month or so, so much so that I have a couple of his speeches, portions of them memorized. That's how much we listened to him and how much my dad would educate us on him and his life and what he has done. And we really, as kids, learned a lot about nonviolence, and why it was important and why um, Dr. King was nonviolent. And, I think back on his speeches and how eloquent they were. And, I just really, really, really enjoyed growing up learning so much about him.
Mm, yeah. So for me, I think everything I know about Dr. King is from the television, of course, watching documentaries, just being interested and following every documentary that would come on and listening to his speeches and just reading up about him. Um, and just following, what he did. I remember there was a period I took time to study the civil rights movement and to see why was it that he had to rise up in the first place. And I was really shocked. I was really shocked to find out that well, you would hear about racism within the American context, about the same time we were hearing about apartheid in South Africa. But when I began to study, I was surprised to hear that slavery had been abolished. And then it didn't quite die in the South. And then it didn't quite die in some of the southern states. And then, of course, I got into forgive me, I don't know the names, but just the stories. I got into the story of the integration of schools and how the seven students, I think, so I just really went down that rabbit hole and I learned so much. And it gave me a background on why Dr. King had to rise up and why, he had to do that. And then, of course, you're talking about the FBI trailing him, the CIA, and the allegations that, oh God, it was a lot, But I think in all of it was hearing about, hearing his speeches, seeing the courage that he had to just continue to go for rally after rally and continue to say no to violence. I admired his wisdom that was almost not earthly, you know,
Yes.
his courage, his everything about him just fascinated me, and I just admired it so much. And he is literally one of the very few people that I wish I had met in person,
Yes.
just so that I can get into his head and hear his, you got a sense of his conviction,
Oh, yeah.
but I would have loved to hear it from his own lips. What is it that you're seeing? What vision did you have, that was so real that you can do this? You know, what
Yes.
assurance or what confidence? I mean, on what are you basing your confidence on? I could understand some of that because, of course, he was the reverend. I think he was also a reverend. So
Yes.
from a point of faith, I could understand that. But because a person is a person of faith, does not necessarily mean that you stood. There are a lot of people who had a call. Miss Lisa is saying he knew the call of. There are lots of people that know this is the call of God on my life, but very few people have the courage to actually stand and do what he did. So he's the one person that when we get to heaven, I would really love to sit and hear and just understand where he was coming from. And I strongly believe it was this, of course, it was the strength of his conviction that got everybody on board because he lent to us, he lent to me his conviction.
Oh, yes. It's growing up and learning about him from my father, it was my mother and father are about the same age. They're a year apart. And my mother grew up on a farm, and they were kind of protected where they didn't know everything that was going on. My grandfather was a person who went into town and bought all the food and stuff like that. So my mother, who was about the same age as my father, did not know Dr. King the way my father knew Dr. King because he lived,
Mm.
and it was something to listen to both of them. Like my mom, she was like an adult when she really, really learned about Dr. King versus my dad knowing about him all his life. My grandfather he grew up on a plantation until he was 8. He wasn't a slave, but he lived on a plantation. And the learning about Dr. King from two different people, I really saw, different sides from what was believed. And my mom was just like amazed at how much my father knew when they're the same age. And learning the nonviolence, I think that was the biggest thing for us as kids, kind of like how him as a man faced so much. And he didn't just face it from um, white people. He faced a lot from people of color that were against him also and thought he was a troublemaker. And
Mm.
that is something that I always wanted to ask. How did you still get up when they were burning crosses in your front yard? They were calling you and threatening you, and you still were able to go out and march, still were able to go out and, still speak and still without faltering. You know what I mean? So that was something that was just always so fascinating that a
So,
man was that strong to say, yeah, I know
mm.
they're threatening me, and I can die, but I'm still going to stand up. And that was what I was always like, wow, like, I don't know if I could be that strong. I don't,
Mm.
you know what I mean? Like, someone calls my house and threatens me and threatens my family, that might make me want to say, maybe this is not the right choice. But day after day, March after March, he still put himself out there. And that amazed me. And like you said,
Mm.
going down the rabbit hole, I always am still researching, still looking at different things because as an adult, his speeches hit different than when I was a child and listening to them and listening to what my dad's understanding of the speeches were. Um,
Mm.
so right now, I do spend a lot of time. Sometimes I just go down that rabbit hole and look up things and, just I think about his courage. Like, I right now, I don't know if I would have that courage that he
Courage,
had.
that courage, that courage. And I would watch his speeches and he'd be so calm. I know, of course, possibly behind the scenes, he'd pace, he would do this, he would do all of that, but he would come out and just be, he would just literally be the embodiment of hopes and dreams and the voice. And in the face of all of that opposition, he carried that responsibility so well, you know. So reading through the comments, Miss Gwen is saying he voiced the feelings of everyday people. So you can ask them what life was like. Yeah, we know what life was like, but I think my point is not about what life was like. It was about his courage as an individual. His courage as an individual. And that is not to say that people in that era were not courageous, but nobody's courage matched his.
True.
Nobody's views matched his. People
Um,
agreed with him and they agreed to work with him, but I believe he was the initiator and the carrier of the conviction, the depth of conviction and the courage. So we know life was bad. I mean, you just, if you listen to even one news report, you would kind of have an idea of how bad it was. But who had the courage to face up to it? Who had the courage to face up to it? I mean, if you look at the history of places where race was an issue, you would find people mostly that would run away,
mhm.
that would go into exile. In the case of apartheid South Africa, a lot of them went into exile and they were fighting from behind the front line. I mean, from behind the scenes. But he was at the front line. Every march, every rally, every communication, he was at the front line. So I don't think that is everyday people. That is a unique thing that was strictly Martin Luther King. I don't think that was a group thing. I think
No.
that was strictly his.
Yeah. I I will say one thing that my dad talked about was it seemed like once he was killed, a lot of the people who marched with him, who were behind him, kind of fell back. You just didn't see them doing the things that Dr. King did. And yeah, he was the leader. And I think that he made people stronger because
He did.
that was one thing that we always talked about that. His strength went to other people and that made them strong. And then when he did pass, when they did murder him, you know, a lot of people kind of fell back. And I can understand that when you have that one strong person that's like, okay, we still got to do this, you're going to be like, all right, let's still do it. And then when they're gone, it is harder to bring yourself to be as brave, to be as strong because you don't have that person anymore.
Yes, because he was the foundation, he was the anchor, he was the pillar, he was the voice. He was literally, to me, he was literally everything, and I think that is what fascinates me the most, about him. So we please keep the comments going. There are a lot of comments going on the YouTube channel, and I really appreciate that. So keep the comments going. I prepared a little slide, just to give us a little bit of guidance and to make sure that the thought process stays on. So I'm going to share my screen, and I really would love to hear your thoughts about what do you think it was about him as an individual? Before him, there was no one, and that is discounting the slave period heroes like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, and I think there was another person, lady or man. discounting them. Because even if you look at the Max, is it Max? What's his name? The other person, the one
Uh,
that had glasses all the time.
Malcolm
What's his
X?
name? What's his name?
Are you
The
talking about
the other figure in civil rights.
Malcolm? Are you talking about Malcolm X? He had glasses.
Yes, Malcolm X. Malcolm X. He wasn't, he was a voice, but he was a little bit different, from Martin Luther King. So I'd really love to hear your your thoughts. And if you were aware during that era, I want you to share with us your recollections. What do you recollect from the conversations, from the mood, from the time, from the things that, what were people saying? What do you remember, even as a child? What was it like? I mean, we see it captured on TV and our imagination runs with us, but we really would love the true life account from you or what you heard from a parent or a grandparent, that you heard directly. I'm not talking about the general gist about it now, but the things that you heard directly. Please share that with us in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my slide. Judy and I will talk about, um, what it is that's the topics that we're trying to raise on that. So please keep the comments. This is a time for education because people like this, they deserve a day. They deserve to be talked about. They deserve for every aspect of what they are, what they did, and how they did it. It deserves to be talked about. So please share that in the comments and let us get this conversation going. So we are talking about the courage of the first stitch. Of course, everything we're talking about has to come back to how does his life impact us, and these are lessons from the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. All right. So what do we really know about the man behind the legacy? You know, the what was his family life like? I must have read somewhere he was hardly home. His wife had to keep things going. Um, they were threatened at home more than once. People throwing stuff through the window. Maybe that's just movie exaggeration. So for me, I wouldn't know fact from truth, truth from movie stuff. So it's up to you now to keep me straight. A lot of what I know is from what I've read and what I've watched in movies and documentaries, that have to do with him. So I will appreciate you setting me straight and sharing some of that information you know. So I was really interested to hear that he was afraid of public speaking. This is someone who gave the I Have a Dream speech that decades later, it is as powerful, as when he first spoke those words. So did your father know anything about this, Judy?
So there was a gospel singer named Mahalia Jackson, and she was a big follower of him, and she sung a lot of gospel songs to kind of help him with fundraising and things like that. Well, on that day, he actually had a whole nother speech prepared. And right before he was getting ready to speak, Mahalia Jackson yelled out, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." He had talked about this dream. So it was not even one that he had written down. He had had a speech that he was going to give that day, and he gave a totally different speech for the I Have a Dream speech. And
Hmm.
I thought that was just amazing because a lot of times what I've learned about him is it took him days. He didn't just kind of scribble something out. It took him time. He studied words. His thing was to really, really know what he's talking about, to understand everything that he was saying. And so I thought it
Hmm.
was amazing that he had talked about this dream he had with Mahalia Jackson, and she just told him, tell him about the dream, and that's where the I have
Mm,
came from. And
wow.
you know, it's amazing that he was able to say, okay, I'm not even going to talk about the speech I have written. I'm going to give a whole nother speech.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it spoke to how well versed he was just in words. The one thing that I learned about him was that he studied speaking. The fact that he was afraid of public speaking made him more, he was just one that it made him so that he wanted to make sure he was saying everything right. He wanted to, okay, how do I say this word? How do I say this so
Mm,
other people understand,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So I think that the struggle, the fear of public speaking made him a better speaker. And
Yes.
I'm going to tie that to quilting a little bit because I'll tell you that I've had a fear of showing my quilts. And even though people tell me like, "Oh, this is beautiful. I love this. You did a great job." I still struggle sometimes. And so this
Mm,
gives me strength to think about, okay, Dr. King had these great speeches and he struggled. So, it's okay to struggle a little bit. It's
mm,
okay.
mm,
That's one thing that I really get from him is it's okay. You can struggle. Just got to keep going. You just got to keep doing it. You got to study your craft. You got to, so that is one thing, his courage.
yeah.
uh,
Courage.
yeah, that was
Courage.
built. It wasn't something that he automatically had,
Yes.
and that I really, really
Yeah.
love about Dr. King.
I honestly, well, I don't know, but for me, my fascination, my admiration, it runs so deep, and I every time I try to run down or run through a line of thoughts, somehow it's like I reach a point, I reach an end to that thought. But it was clear that he went further. For someone who didn't even like to speak publicly, became the voice, became the voice of the 1960s, I think, if I'm not mistaken, became the voice of the 60s, became the voice that echoed the struggles and the hopes and the suffering of a whole people. And so, even though he was afraid, he learned to pick just the right words that conveyed all of this heaviness, and with such articulation and with such power
Yes.
that the opponents wouldn't be able to discount it. He was not emotional. He was not vituperative, just talking anyhow, but he spoke in a way and he spoke timeless truth. He spoke enduring truth. And I think that is why up until now we can look at his words and it makes sense to us. Because if it was based on lies or it was based on just hot emotion, I don't think it would have endured as much as him picking his words, letting go of the things that didn't serve, and just getting to the heart of the matter and just speaking it with courage and with boldness and with grace and intelligence, and conviction and power, and that he struggled with doubt and fear, I think, and pressure. I think, of course, pressure, because the whole weight of a culture, of a people was lying on him, whether he wanted it or not. You know, he was
Yeah.
just being true to himself, maybe, and all of us are latching on him because he's making up for the courage that we don't have. He's speaking the words that we cannot articulate. So I can see how he felt that pressure. And I'm happy to know, I think I was watching the movie or somebody's narration about how He would maybe go up on the rooftop. He wouldn't sleep. He would be pacing. He would smoke. He would do this. You know, he was just trying to let out all of that pressure and the struggle and the fear and all of that. And so on that point, I could relate with him. And so for me, it was, how did he go beyond struggling with doubt and fear and pressure and still perform so excellently? You know,
Yeah, that is
of
something
course.
that,
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's amazing how calm he was when he was in front of the cameras, when he was in front of a group of people. Right now when sometimes when I teach or when I have to get up in front of a group, and I was the president of the Modern Quilt Guild and I had to get up in front of a group every month. I still have to calm myself, but I still sometimes look back and see a little nervousness when I'm talking to make sure, like, wait, did I say everything I was supposed to say? And with him, it was just a conversation. And that's what I loved. He was able to um, really hit a point home without yelling at you, without being angry.
Getting worked up and, you
Yes.
know, yeah.
And you really heard it, understood it, and that,
Mm-hmm.
that nonviolence that was in him
Mm.
was so strong, and it came out as power. It didn't
Yes.
come out as weakness the way some people
Yes.
would think it would. It did not come out
Yeah.
as weakness.
No,
It came
not at
out
all.
as
No,
power.
no. Yes. Absolutely. I wish there was more about his life, about his habits, about his routine, about his schedules, about his Bible study time, about who was his pastor, who did he sit under, what did he learn? I think his dad too was a preacher, right? So he
Yeah.
must have sat under his dad, but as he grew into his own, what was his faith?
Hmm.
Was it his father's faith? Did he discover his own faith, or did purpose just overtake? I mean, I want to know everything, about him. And so what he is teaching us is that change doesn't begin with perfection. It just doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with conviction and just taking that first step. Because he must have risen through the ranks of the movement. He didn't just appear at the top.
Right.
He must have started from somewhere, and his conviction and courage, progress, and just pushing past through all the obstacles he had pushed him to the top. But he must have started somewhere, and there must have been other people before him well, I will say that without any disrespect, who made a show of being the leaders,
Hmm.
maybe without carrying the courage or the conviction, until his voice came and the force of his conviction really made people look at him.
Yes, definitely. And you know what? There's, of course, a lot of other people during the civil rights movement that was able to maybe get things started. Um, and sometimes people are so discouraged that they kind of, back out and
Mm,
down. And I think that the fact that he didn't do that, the fact
yeah,
that he just kept going no matter what. They put him in jail. Whatever happened, came, letters from the Birmingham jail. You know what I mean? He still kept going. And
yeah.
I think that's why his name is one that everybody learns about in school. Uh,
Mm.
one that we keep in the forefront because he never backed down.
He never backed down.
Yeah.
He always stood up and he never backed down. Irrespective of who started it, he carried it the furthest. I think that is so amazing. So in the chat, um, I think Gwen and said one of his mentors, or she said, an American Baptist minister and civil rights leader who laid the foundation, credited with laying the foundation, the intellectual foundation of the civil rights movement. And then Lisa is saying Gandhi. Yes, you remember Gandhi. Gandhi was the Indian who withstood against the British nonviolence, and he was immovable. I think that's what I learned. That's what I noted about him. But honestly, yeah, Gandhi did a did a great thing, but um I'm being biased. He just didn't have the charisma of Dr. King. Oh, his good looks,
Well,
by the way.
I will say one of the things that
Not to discredit what he did, but you know.
yeah. Well, one thing that Gandhi said in his admiration for MLK was that he feels that MLK was going to be the person that really carried the nonviolent movement. Even though Gandhi had did some things,
Yes,
but
yeah.
he really, his admiration, he was like, I really think that, having him say that, I really think that King is
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
one,
mm-hmm.
to carry this movement of
Yeah,
nonviolence. And
yes,
I think that is great that,
yes,
he was
yes.
able to reach out, not
Mm,
just within the United States, but to other
yes.
countries, other continents. His bravery, his leadership of the movement, really
Mm,
was not
yes,
just in the South, in the United States. It carried, and that really says a lot about him.
it does. It does. It really does, but of course, that is the life we live. We learn from others. We we learn from what others have done, and we put our spin on it, and it becomes ours. Yeah, so Gandhi might have started the non-violent movement, taking that stance, and it was clearly something that Dr. King saw and admired, and probably wondered about. But I think he took that and he made it his own in a way that totally is different. You can say Dr. King and Dr. And Gandhi rather than attaching King to Gandhi. I don't know if that makes sense,
It
but
does.
that's the world we live in. We should look to ourselves to grow. I should see something about somebody that inspires me,
Mhm.
to either take a stand or to change or to move even further. And I think that's the maybe the connection, that King and between King and Gandhi. So um Dr. King used his words to unite people the same way that quilting tells stories without words. Art can bridge generations and cultures, you know. Of course, there is no comparison. We're not saying in any way that quilting is comparable to the amazing work, the historical import of cultural and generational imports that Dr. King did. But I just said we can learn lessons from who has gone before, who is doing something, and that is what some of the things that that we can learn from Dr. King that we can put into our art, into the things that we do. I'm so big on saying your creative voice. What is your quilting voice? It matters because imagine if he had allowed his fear of speaking keep him silent,
Uh,
but he was just strong to tell his own truth, to tell his own conviction in his own words. And it just so happened that that is what struck a chord with almost everybody, you know. So it's also important that, in our art, in our quilting, we tell our story and we tell it in our own voice, and we never know where that resonates, you know. It might not rally people in a way that Dr. King did, but it's certainly speaking and resonating with someone somewhere. So for me, that's what I have to say about this.
And I want to just throw this in. Something that I learned that I never really thought was important was labeling our quilts. When I look back at my grandmother's quilts, you know what? Sometimes I sit and I say, I wonder when she did this. You know, what was going on in her life? Now I can look at her quilt and say, you know what, that was my grandfather's shirt. That was, my
Mm-hmm.
uncle's shirt. And I can look and see that. But I think that when we're telling our quilting stories, because we know when Dr. King did this speech and when, we know why he did certain speeches. And I think that when we pursue our art and we are quilting, we should put a label on that says, you know what, I did this in 2025, and even a little bit of a why,
Mm,
artist
mm,
statements. If you
mm,
do art quilts are something that I think, you know, i- if it was, I'm just saying this as Dr. King doing a quilt, there would be an artist statement as to why he did it. There
mm.
would be some understanding. So I do feel like, when we're telling our stories without words, we need just a little bit to help
Documents, yeah.
future generations know,
Yes.
this is what was going on in the world, and this is kind of why I did it. So,
Mm,
I just think that we need to, yes, definitely tell our stories. We need to, you know, use our art to tell future
mm.
generations how our life was.
Yes. Yes. So Lisa agrees with you. Labeling our quilts is so important. And speaking as a Black person, an African person, we are not big on, it's not really something that we do. Our stories tend to be more spiritual. The emphasis on the spiritual and the intangible tends to be more than on the tangible, than on the written or on the, well, so English fails me here, but as an African, when you're narrating a story, you focus more, or as a Black person, you're focusing more. I thought it was an African thing, but now that, with Quilt Africa, I'm beginning to see that is all of us Black, we do that. We focus more on the weight of the story rather than the factuality of the story. And so that's why in Africa, you would find, oh, this river is where our grandfathers used to cross to do something, something, something. But when the colonials came, they would say, we found this river. It was discovered by us. And they would give you dates and they would say all sorts of things. And unfortunately, that is what would endure because that's the factual, and the weight of our stories that are intangible, that have a spiritual connection, that have a, is it's about our soul and our spirit that gets lost. What endures is that Mungo Park came. So they
Yeah.
tell us that the rivers in Nigeria were discovered by Mungo Park, the British explorer in 1940 something, something, something. Rivers that we know, rivers that we have stories about, but he discovered it. And that is the written aspect of it. So I want to encourage, especially Black creators, Black quilters, go ahead and document your journey. And so now they say Mungo Park discovered River Niger, one of the longest rivers in Nigeria. We do not have any written information about what the Africans did with the river,
Mhm.
what we did as Nigerians with the river. So yeah, Mungo Park discovered the river. So go ahead and give both the spiritual and the soul edifying information as well as the factual written information that would last, that would be carried through. Because the feeling information can get lost in translation. The nuances are lost, but the factual one is the one that will endure because they're just words, they're just letters. But unfortunately, that is what endures. So I concur with Judy. As much as you can, share the story of your journey, share the story of your work, and labeling is such a, I mean, such a quick, beautiful way of doing that. There is no restriction on the size of your labels. You can go creative. You can actually put a label on one long side of your quilt to narrate the story. You can put labels at the four corners of your quilt, to tell the story. So I encourage everybody to learn how to label and to at least tell the fundamental, that accompanies that work, that piece. Give us the
What
fundamental information about it.
Yeah. One thing I've started to do is not just label, but take pictures and I keep them on on my computer, on a drive, in the cloud. These are my quilts that I'm making. This is the year. And I'll even, maybe put a little artist statement with it, even if it's just a t-shirt quilt that I made, for a friend. I made this quilt for on this date because, and so that someone can see my cloud pictures and say, oh, okay, I remember that quilt, or
Mhm, mhm.
that kind of thing. Even if you don't want to say, I'm putting a label on every quilt, keep a kind of a journal of your quilts and that says these are the quilts I made because my when one of my grandmother's friends passed away, her children gave my mom a quilt and says, "Oh, your mom made this for my mom."
Hmm.
And we're like, "Oh, I wonder when was that?" And they was like, "I don't know, but she had it forever." And she always said Miss Josephine made that quilt. And so now my mom got a quilt back that my grandmother made. That it's possible I could have tied that quilt, because my grandma would call me up and say, I got, she'd have the strings in there and I'd be on the floor, she'd be talking to me and I'd be sitting there tying all her quilts. So, of course, back then they wouldn't have had pictures and all that kind of stuff, but it would have been nice to go back and say, let's see when grandma made this quilt because she had a picture,
Yes, yes,
that
yes,
kind of thing.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
even if you don't label them, try to take, keep pictures because you never know when your quilt comes back to your family members.
Mhm, yes, yeah. I think that's a really good one. So just speaking briefly about this, we want to encourage you, just start before you feel ready. I think that is feeling ready is I think is what's the word I'm looking for? Saying that I want to feel ready is is an elusive concept. You're never ever ready. It's so elusive. You're
And
never ever ready for the big things, that you should do, or the big words you should say, or the big message you should pass across. You're never ever really ready, So before you feel ready, as long as you feel that gush of passion, or that, sometimes it feels like something wanting to break loose out of you. Once you feel that, that's just take that as your cue for readiness and just go ahead. Don't wait for certainty. Don't wait for things. Just don't wait and say, I want from 1 to 10 to be ready. Just go ahead and do what you can with what you have, you know.
I, I
I-
think a lot of times we wait
Yes.
for everything to be perfect, that we have everything.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, my first quilt was 100 blocks in 100 days. I did
Hmm.
one block at a time. I, had bought fabric. I didn't know what I was going to do with that fabric. I just thought it was pretty. And it ended up where, I said, you know what, I want a quilt. And I was trying to figure that out. And I was waiting till I had the perfect sewing machine and I needed rotary cutters and I needed this and I needed that.
Mm-hmm.
My
Mm-hmm.
friend was just like, No, just pick a block and sew it." And I was just like, oh, and it took me a couple of days to pick that
Hmm.
block I wanted to sew. But then I sewed that one block and I was so proud of myself. It was just a simple 4 patch. That's all it was. It wasn't anything intricate. It was just a simple 4 patch. And I was like,
Yes.
this is so pretty. Oh my goodness. And then the next day, I just picked the next block. And then the next day, I picked the next block. And before I knew it, I had 100 blocks that I was
Wow.
laying out and putting it together my quilt. And I'll tell
Awesome.
you, it took me 2 days to get the right layout that I really wanted, but I did it and I put that quilt together. And
Mm.
I realized, guess what? I didn't have everything that they say a quilter needs.
Yes,
I had a
yes,
machine, pins, and fabric.
yes.
And my first quilt I did with scissors. I didn't even do it with a rotary cutter. So just really get started. Just pick a block. Don't look at, and that's the
Just
thing I tell new quilters, don't look at the whole quilt because you'll be intimidated.
one piece at a time.
Start with, okay, I'm starting with this block. And that is how I got in with quilting. I
Yeah. Yeah, I think we share that story as well. Well, I mean, I got possessed. I don't know. That's the best. That's the only way I can say it. I got possessed. And after the initial back and forth of, can you even quilt? Do you even know what you're doing? Like you said, I don't have this, I don't have that. What I did was I just would take, at that time, so many things now that seem so common sense and so commonplace with quilting. When I was starting, I had no idea. You know, um, I could see the rotary cutters and the rulers, but I ended up using just my tape rule and a pair of scissors, and I was cutting squares.
Mhm.
It was later on someone said, but why didn't you just use cornflakes pack and just cut out? I said, I could, that's true, I could have done that. But I was but I had reached a point where I was so determined that nothing would stop me. Whether I had a template, whether I had a cutting mat, a rotary cutter, or a ruler, I didn't care. I was just going to cut squares and just stitch them together. So I struggled with not having the equipment. But when I made up my mind that I didn't care whether I didn't have the equipment, I would just do what I did. I shut down every avenue of, okay, try this, try that, because that was taking so much time trying to figure out an easier way or a better way. I just said, look, forget about it. And so I bought so much fabric and wasted so much, because imagine cutting squares with no guidance. So some of them would be so wonky, I'd throw them away and all of that. But at the end of it, I was so proud of myself. I really felt like someone who had landed on the moon, because seriously, that was how it felt to me. Like, here I am in Abuja, nobody quilts, nobody taught me, nobody did anything, but I made this quilt. I felt so incredibly amazing, and I was not ready for it. I kept starting and stopping, that pressure and that doubt and that um fear. It was all with me, but I would wake up and I would do it. And there were times I actually packed it, I was going to throw it in the trash. I would pack it up and say, I'm throwing this thing away. It doesn't even make sense. But something would stop me. And I would leave it for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month. I wouldn't touch it. But eventually I'd be like, you've come this far. Why don't you just continue? And I did that. And eventually, I came up with a quilt. So I'm sure everybody here can tell their story of starting before they're ready, starting small and all of that. So if you are here and you are still struggling with the decision to say, I have my big signature quilt in my head, but I want this and I want that and just forget about, just go in,
Yes.
even if you don't have all the fabrics that you have starts. Plan it out, start with what you have and make it a journey, rather than, don't put pressure on yourself. There are
Mm.
some pressures that we cannot help, but I think quilting pressure is something that we can help. So go ahead and just forget about that pressure, and just focus on it and get it done, because your creative voice, it matters, letting out that thing on the inside of you. Jeremiah says it's like fire shut up in my bones. I just have to get it out. That's your sign that you're ready. When you feel that burst, like a floodgate just wants to come out of you, that is just your sign, that you're ready, whether it's verbally like Dr. King did, or with I felt I was ready to make a quilt. It was hard for me, it was difficult, it was annoying, but it was like something inside a quilt really wanted to come out of me, and I went ahead and I did it. And it appears that Judy also has the same story. So if
Exactly.
you're there and you're struggling, please go ahead and just let it loose. Once you feel that pressure, that pressure that just wants to come out, go ahead and let it.
Well,
Everything starts small. Yeah.
I will say that one thing, like I love t-shirt quilts,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll tell you how I started making t-shirt quilts. I found some there were shirts at Children's Place is a store here. And I was walking in the mall and I was like, oh, is that little black girls on the front of a t-shirt? Oh, and I went in and I bought all these t-shirts for my goddaughter. And I took the t-shirts to her and she was just like, I don't wear people on my shirts. And I was just like, these little girls are beautiful. What do you mean? And so I said, give me my shirts back. And then I was just like, what am I gonna do with these shirts? And I'll tell you, I went online and there was a YouTube University. There was a lady who did an 8-part series on how to do a t-shirt quilt. I watched the whole series, then I went back and step by step made that t-shirt quilt. Oh, she
Mm.
wanted the t-shirt quilt, but she,
She doesn't want to wear the people.
didn't want to wear the people. And I
She
was
wants to
like,
sleep with them instead.
but I was just like, I'll make her another one. But this is my first one. I'm keeping. And that's what I did. I bought more shirts and made her another one. But
Yeah.
that was how like I wanted to do something with these shirts. So
Hmm. Hmm. So we're still talking about using your art to build bridges. Your voice is unique. You just never know which message gets taken up. You hear about people trending, about people going viral. You're just doing your thing, and one just resonates. And you want to make sure that when you go viral with your quilts are telling the kind of story that you want told, you want heard. I think that's the bottom line thing that I am going for. You want to make sure that whenever your quilts go viral or whenever your voice goes viral, you want to make sure that you have the kind of message that you actually want people to hear and identify with you. Yes, these are my color choices. Yes, I chose this pattern because, yes, I did it this way because it's what you want people to hear. You do not want to work in a haphazard manner, or you don't want to work because someone influenced you to work. It just dilutes the integrity of your message and your voice, you know. So sometimes if you use the word legacy, it seems big, it seems intimidating, it seems like it's multifaceted, multi-layered, multidimensional. It's, you know, but just think about it as you speaking. And it doesn't have to be complex. Are these the colors and if you, by any chance, you choose colors or patterns, then it comes, there should be a label, there should be something that says, oh, I tried something different. And we would know that this is not your regular thing, So just a little bit more structure, a little bit more, I don't know, so maybe Judy will help me here, but just
I will say this. The one thing that I love about looking at other people's quilts are saying, I wouldn't have used those colors together. Ooh, love that block. What block is that? And, then looking at and saying, I understand this story. I know this person. I understand what they're saying. So,
mm,
I love, love, love quilt shows. And I think that, we should use call for entries as ideas. Even if you're not going to show your quilt, you look at that call for entry and say, what quilt would I make? And make that quilt, and it's just like there was a show, it was a fashion show, and I don't remember the name of it right now, but the one of the contestants had applied to the show and said, when I was watching the show, this is the quote I made for this challenge. This is the dress. This is dress I made for this challenge. This is the dress I would have made for that challenge. And I thought that was so interesting. And he got on because he showed like while he was watching the show for all those years, Project Runway is what it's called. While
yes,
he
yes.
show for all those years, he was looking at and saying, I want to do that challenge.
Wow.
He did the challenge. So
Wow.
it's a possibility that nobody would have ever seen those challenges, but he did them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Mm-hmm.
why I think that your voice is unique because everybody will look at a call for entry and think of something totally different.
Yes.
I love that. And that's when I go to a quilt show and they'd say the theme of this quilt show is, and then I see so many different ideas, so many
Mm.
different,
Mm.
people's imagination. Like, she took that totally different from that person. And so that's why I think that it's just great to use a call for entry just as inspiration, even if you're not putting your quilt in, and then go see that quilt show and see how many different ways people came
Yes,
up
you
with
did that. Yes.
to do
Yes.
that entry.
Yeah. At this point, I think I have to say that I'm really proud because most of our tribe members do that. A lot of the times when we call for challenges in the tribe, some people don't follow the dead timelines, but they get the fabrics, and they create the pieces, and they say, "Oh, I'm not bothered about it being juried, but I just want to do it." And that is just an easy way to do that. One thing Elia Pastena Knight said to me was that she enters in a lot of challenges, not just Quilt Africa challenges, but she does challenges or once she's interested, she jumps on it because she finds that it increases her bandwidth, and I agree with that because it helps you the best way to know yourself is to do things.
Mhm.
You get to know what you like, you get to know what you don't like, but if you sit and you're thinking about it, you may think you like it until you do it. Then you're like, I actually don't like this thing too much. So the best way to improve and the best way to kind of like find your quilting style or quilting voice is to just do things, plan it out, Sometimes from the planning stage, this is not my thing. But sometimes from the planning stage, you're like, oh, I can see this thing and I want to run with this. So I really love what you said about responding to call for entries. I think it's a great way to build your body of works. It's a great way to learn about yourself as a quilter. It's a great way to explore techniques and see, what it is that you are naturally inclined to, you
Yes.
know. I
And
really like that. Yeah.
I look at call for entries all over the world. I looked at a call for entry that's coming up for Australia. They have a quilt show.
Hmm.
Am
Hmm.
I going to enter the quilt show? No. However, I designed a quilt for it and I probably
Hmm.
will make it. So, I just yesterday looked at the Atlanta Quilt Festival. Um,
Hmm.
they have a call for entry, and theirs is about music. And so I'm just,
Yes.
I'm thinking, what would I do for that?
Yeah.
I look at those call for entries. Sakwa has call for entries that
Hmm.
know, there's or 6 months to a year out, and you can
Mm.
think about and design the quilt and decide whether you're going to make it and enter it.
Yeah.
I entered a quilt for QuiltCon this year. It didn't get picked, but I have friends that said, "Oh, I enter every year and don't get picked." But this is my first time, and I was just like, "I'm going to do it. I'm going to try." So
Yeah.
even if you do it, number one, nobody but you knows that it didn't get picked unless you tell people. You know what I'm saying? But I don't mind saying, yeah, my quilt didn't get picked. They had 2,000 quilts come in and they picked 400.
Mm.
So,
Wow.
you know, am I going to try again next year? Yes, I am. I'm going to go until they pick some up, you know?
Yes, that's one way to get them to notice your style, your technique, your use of fabric, and all of that. Just bombard them with it. And at some point, they will take notice and say, we've seen this kind of thing before from this same person. So I
Yeah.
really like that. Okay, so rounding up before we completely finish with this, I want to remind you that we have a sale, 30% off site-wide on fabrics and classes and all of that. Explore the African Names collection. Don't forget to join our community either by email, or the Facebook group where you can get to share your pieces with people, and just enjoy the camaraderie of people who quilt with African fabrics. And then um, encouraging you to keep sharing about Dr. King's inspiration, not just to us as individuals or to Americans, but honestly, he's a global icon. I think I can say that, so we're going to let you know that we have a Martin Luther King workshop coming in February when we kick off Black History Month, because he is so integral, to not just being celebrated on his day, but he is so integral as well to Black History Month. I think if you are looking at, maybe how they say the 100 influential people or whatever, of Black history, he is definitely in the top half, of that. You put him on the same level as I mentioned, Harriet Tubman, and and all the other people that fought, and I dare say that in modern history, recent history, he could very well be the top um influence, in Black history. You could very well be, so look out for that. We're going to have a wait list, and we're looking to host that, once we get into February. All right. So we are going to round up with this discussion on his quote that he said in 1957, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? How does Dr. King's journey inspire your creative path? And the question is, it's persistent, it is urgent. What are you doing for others? So I'll allow Judy to round us off with that. And then we're going to go off and respond to some of the comments that have been coming in the chat. Judy?
So when I think about what I'm doing for others, I I love to sew. And if I am not working on a quilt, I am, doing projects. So one of the things that I do that I is just to put a smile on a face is I make pillowcases for the local children's hospital.
Hmm.
There's an organization out there called Ryan's Case for Smiles. And it was a mother who her son was in the hospital with cancer. And she just went in, the hospital room was just so bland. And so she made him a pillowcase that just to put a smile on his face. And the next day, he came with 3 or 4 other kids who wanted a pillowcase. So she ended up taking her sewing machine to the hospital, sewing
Wow.
pillowcases for kids. And then other mothers brought their sewing machines. And that's how this whole pillowcases for the
Hmm.
children in the hospital came
Yeah.
about. And I'm actually the coordinator for Albuquerque. And
Hmm.
people make pillowcases and donate them to me. And, I'm the person that washes them and puts them in little baggies and take them to the hospital. And, it's something that's small, but the kids love it. I do special celebration fabric for birthdays. So for kids there on their birthday, they get a special pillowcase. And my quilt gills, I'm in several. They are just godsend when it comes to giving me fabric,
Hmm.
um, pillowcases, giving me kits, having sew days where we just get together and sew pillowcases. So,
Hmm.
I think about that kind of thing. What am I doing for others? What else can I do? And I don't want my craft just to be something that I keep to myself. Not one child have I ever met at the hospital. However, they've taken home a part of me because I was
Yes.
like, I'm collecting fabric. I'm
Yes.
doing everything that I can. And those are little small things. Like if are in the United States, every state has a coordinator that's collecting these pillowcases. And there's so many other opportunities out there to use your craft to help. And I know Miriam she goes to the orphanage in her area, and she takes items and things like that. And I think that that is just, the smallest thing that you can find to do. One other thing that my quilt guild does is we make quilts. And if an organization wants to have a raffle, we donate that quilt and say, hey, use this as one of your raffle prizes.
Mm,
So really, I think that that is an urgent question. What are you doing for others? And
mm,
I'm glad that he brought that question to the forefront.
mm,
Dr. King said, let's help other people. He was not just about what can I do for me? What can I do for others? What can you do for others? So that is something that I think is one of the biggest things that we can take from Dr. King. His
yes,
courage and that one question, what can we do to help?
yes. Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think that's another reason why he fascinates me so much. He was not a one-dimensional person. You know, if you look at like for this coat, for instance, is not as famous as some of his other coats, but it just still gives you a glimpse of the kind of person that he is, not one-dimensional. He was a fully formed, a fully formed individual who had what he was passionate about, had his cause, had what he was willing to die for, but he also had things that were within him that he had come to the conclusion. Every individual has a point where they come to certain conclusions about who they are, what they want to believe, their value system, and all of that. And just by this, it tells you a lot about his value system. It tells you a lot about his development. He was not a lopsided person who was all about just the civil rights movement. There is nowhere here that it says, um, what are you doing for people? He was not even a race person, you know. He even with the dream, he wasn't saying my race has to be on top. He was just saying everybody deserves equality, and I think that is just what I love about this quote. Why I love him so much. He was not one dimensional. He was just a well-formed human being in the ways that matters. Of
Yes.
course, he would have had his human faults, his human weaknesses, but in the things that mattered, he was well-formed and he was strong, and he was resolute, in a way that you want someone to be who is
Oh,
in
yeah,
your corner. You don't
definitely.
want a wishy-washy, I
Yeah.
don't know, anything goes kind of person in your corner. You want someone who is strong on the inside and who can stand for what you believe and who can help you uphold your own beliefs by his own beliefs. To
Mhm.
me, I don't know him, but he just seems to me to be that kind of person. And he inspires me every day. There was a quote of his that I think for 2 years I had it pinned somewhere, and that was my mantra for those 2 years. That was just what I would look at that, and it would strengthen me on the inside, and I would go out and get into the fight one more time, because I just kept saying this man knew they were going to kill him. There's no way. Even if a prophet, a fortune teller came and told him, no, don't worry, go and fight the civil rights fight, no bullet will touch, it's a lie. He knew it. He knew at some point his life was like gone, you know, and he within that deadline, he died so young. Within that deadline, he impacted so much. He did so much, you know. He did so much. He did so much, not just for the civil rights movement, but for humanity.
Yeah.
To look at this quote is about humanity. This quote is about the person next to you. What are you doing for them? What can you do for them? You know, and all of that. And honestly, he is my all-time favorite. Every time February comes around, January comes around, I'm like, oh Lord, I start thinking, I start meditating, I start digging up his videos, and I start watching, and I just go down that road, and I'm trying to get into his head. See,
Yeah.
why did you do this? How did you do it? More than why, how did you do it? The
Mm.
why influences the how, but I want to know how. How
Mm.
did you do it? All of us have our whys, but not many people have the hows. He had the why and he had the how. How did he do it? You know, and I think if I can find out how he did it, I will sell it and I'll be rich. So I'm going to stop sharing. We're going to get into the chat. And I want to thank everybody who has made a comment. You know, um, there's so many comments, about quilting, about Dr. King, about his history, you know, um, and there's just so much, to be said. And I want to encourage everyone, if he was outside of your time, maybe, of course, he's so old, everything happened so way back. If you don't know much about him, I encourage you to go ahead and study. When someone makes a sacrifice, there's only so much. This is only one of the ways that we can honor him. He doesn't know us, his family don't know us, they don't know we're doing this. But when he was fighting, he didn't know us either. you know, when he was fighting for equality, he didn't know us either. So for me, this is one of the ways that I feel I can honor him, to have people who regarded him as well, who honored him, to just come and to talk about him and to remember him, so that his death is not in vain. In our own little way, we are honoring who he was, who he became, you know, and what he died just fighting for, you know. If we
Um,
had, sorry, to go ahead, please.
no, I was just going to say, in Atlanta, Georgia, you can go and visit his childhood home and
Mm,
a lot. They take you on a tour and tell you a lot about him and who he was growing up, him and his
mm,
brother and
mm,
shenanigans that he used to get into.
mm.
His sister used to do the tour, but I think now she's gotten older.
Yeah,
MLK would have been 97 this year. So I don't
yes.
think she does it anymore, but it was very interesting to go through that house
Mm,
on that tour and learn about him as a child. Like, he jumped out of a window and broke his arm. And, you can see the window he jumped out of. Um,
mm,
and it is something that is just it was just very interesting for me to go
yeah,
to that house. This was probably mm, maybe 10 years ago now. But the
yeah.
one thing that I love is that the family said, yes, we will turn this over and let you make it into a museum. However,
Mm,
cannot do is run the people out of this neighborhood. So the family
mm,
said, yes, we'll do this. We'll make it a national monument. However, we are not, they weren't going to make it where now they built houses around there that people who would live there all their life couldn't no
nice.
longer.
Yes, yes,
So I
yes,
thought
yes,
that was
yes.
just like, it wasn't just him,
Mm,
the about everything about him went through his family, and his family said nope, we'll say yes, but and so the houses that are there are the same
mm,
that were there when he grew up, and some of the same families that you know their children, their grandchildren are still in
mm,
and
mm.
that's something that I really.
Wow. So if you are near Atlanta, you are going to Atlanta, you have never been there, I think you should go there. Like I said, it's just one of the few ways that you can honor him. You can keep his work alive, keep his legacy alive. One of the things I did when I went to Johannesburg was to visit Soweto and also visit Nelson Mandela's home, where his first home, I think, where he was married with Winnie, before his arrest and during the heat of the apartheid movements. It's just what you can do to honor them, because it takes a lot for a man to stand up for many. It's
Yes.
easy for many to stand for one, but it's so hard for one to stand for many. It's just one of the things that we can do, and it's one of the ways that we can keep that legacy enduring for future generations. When people know that there's somewhere you can go, or there's a day you can mark, or there's conversation you can have about this individual and what he said and how is it years later. I think it's just the least we can do, as a people. So, yes, yes, the Ebenezer Baptist Church, yes, I think I know that. That's from Gwen, where he attended. I think I heard that before. He was educated in Morehouse. I know Morehouse from the Bill Cosby show. I have no idea what Morehouse is, except that it featured in Bill Cosby and he held it in high regard. So I think that's a very good thing. I know his wife, Coretta King. Yes, she was a phenomenal wife. You know, she was amazing to have just stood through all of that and lived through all of that and just encouraged him, or even if she didn't, she allowed him to do what he knew he was meant to do, you know. Um, yeah, so many comments. I encourage you to go through the comments, on the YouTube channel. You're going to learn a lot. There's a lot of information about him. And like I said, if you've never done that, please go ahead and do a little search, read a little, watch a little of his videos. I was so fascinated by the one I sent in my last email. Someone had colored it up and it came alive, right? So yeah, this is just one of the ways that we can honor him, honor the work that he did, and honor his legacy. So once again, I want to say thank you, Judy, for coming and sharing your
Enjoy.
thoughts and your experiences of him. And thank you to everyone who stayed with us, to hear what we had to say. If you're listening to this in the future, go ahead and drop your comments, drop memories, drop things that strike you about Dr. King. You know, I think I would come in periodically to just read so that I can learn more about him. So any last words, Miss Judy, as you close us out?
I just want to say that Dr. King's legacy uh, is one that is so important to everybody, not
Mhm.
just African Americans, just everybody, because he fought for everybody. He fought just for equality.
Mhm.
With him fighting for that, we need to keep his legacy alive.
Yeah.
Um, I encourage you to, maybe listen to one of his speeches and turn it into a quilt. It doesn't have to be a huge quilt. You can do just a little 12 by 12 block, just something to acknowledge him and his life.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. I think it's important just to carry it forward, make sure he becomes a living legend, even in death, with what he has done. So, no surprises. I love Dr. King. I think he was very handsome, very debonair, very well spoken, very articulate, irrespective of the challenges that he had to go through. He came out on the other end and he did what he had to do on this earth before he was killed. And I pray that for all of us, that in this lifetime, we will do the one thing, that would stand us out. All of us cannot be Dr. King's level, but in our own corner and in our own hearts, we will know whether, we are getting something done or
I
not.
just, I just have
Right?
Yeah, I just have a fun fact about him that I learned when I was younger. He was a pool shark. He loved pool and he would go in and people didn't think he could play, but he was excellent at playing pool. So
Wow.
that was one way that he would blow off steam is to go and play pool.
Yes. Was he a very tall person? Who knows how tall he was?
Um, I don't
Or
remember.
just average height for a man, not
For a man,
particularly tall?
yeah, he wasn't, like extra tall. And in my mind right now, I'm thinking 5'9", but I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly.
Okay. Okay. Okay, all right. I mean, these are the fun facts that just help him come alive, and all of that. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And I really appreciate um everything that was shared. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate you being there. So this is it. We'll call it a night. Enjoy the rest of your day. And we will see you on Wednesday for Uncut Threads. Take care and enjoy the rest of Dr. King's day. Bye-bye.
Hey, everyone.